Right. A very good afternoon, everyone. What an exciting day it has been, really to engage and deliberate on topics that are really pertaining, driving this economy of ours forward, right? Really looking forward to having a conversation or, sharing my perspective on this specific subject, yeah? If you don't mind going to the next slide, yeah? Where's the clicker? Oh, it's here. Sorry, thank you. So I think as I've been introduced, I'll be covering some wide topics, and I think I'll be doing a little bit of a mix, I think, in the conversation as well, as you can see, right? So starting the conversation, I will borrow maybe some research work that has been done by the World Economic Forum, right? In terms of how can ICT develop the country, right? I think it starts with people, right? I mean, people are at the center of whatever it is that we do. And I think some of the key challenges that we face are around, food security, right? How do we then, improve things like, the healthcare systems, utilizing ICT as a whole. If you remember, I think our keynote speaker this morning actually spoke about, some of the disruption we are seeing from an agricultural point of view around IoT devices, measuring the weather, and all of those requires connectivity in order for it to work, right? You've seen some level of disruption as well in terms of, some of the advancement that has been made from a neurosurgical point of view, where, the brain can be scanned very quickly. And all of that data needs to actually be harnessed and actually, be analyzed in order for us to actually effect, corrective measures to actually help, people to actually, find ways of healing, right? Secondly, I think one critical aspect is that we exist in an environment, a planet, and we need to take care of the planet we actually exist in. And in doing so, I think we need to protect, right, the planet. And I think we contribute a lot as manufacturers. I work for a manufacturer. And as a result, we create a lot of waste through plastic. So how do we ensure that, we start thinking about true partnership that is more meaningful around, products that we actually use in our processing, to ensure that it's actually biodegradable and that it does not actually create more harm into the environment we operate in, right? But I think the third part is around really creating prosperity. And I think prosperity really links more around, the quality, of, lives that we want to leave behind for people. How do we ensure that we interconnect and connect everyone to be able to be empowered and to make decisions using ICT, plugging their mobile devices, may it be at home, may it be at work? How do we encourage things like, work from home without really, talking about the challenges that we have around ICT, right? But most importantly, I think some people find, leisure time in actually, engaging with these products that we all create. And as a result, it's always important to understand that, there's certain factors that plays whenever we actually create these products. But the industries as well have looked at ICT, and I think they're asking themselves, how do we continue being disruptive, right? While we actually service our customers, while we service our consumers, and how do we connect, our factories as a result of, trying to understand where our losses are coming from, trying to understand how better we actually manage our quality so that, the products that we produce really are living up to the standards that we promise our consumer. And without really connecting, all the instruments within the factories, all the assets that are actually used for processing of these products, to visualize and to help really in driving down efficiencies within the environment, I think, we cannot do that, right? But lastly, I think, how do we create new markets, right? There is a lot of startups that are really thinking beyond just the work that we are doing and actually thinking about how do we reach the mainstream consumer that is in the township, as an example, right? And what do we need to actually reach that mainstream consumer that sits within the township? And what are the backbone systems and, challenges that we're actually navigating through on day in, day out that are actually making it impossible for the guy that actually owns a spaza, for the lady that owns a 𝐒𝐴ZA in East Africa, West Africa, trying to make ends meet for their family. How do we make sure that we empower that person to be able to actually be interconnected, but how do we therefore ensure that we collate that data back within our organizations to actually make better decisions that really drives profitability within the organizations that we represent? Lastly, I think, whenever we do this, we need to do it in an equitable way, right? How do we make sure that we are inclusive in the manner in which we do things? How do we democratize that access to make sure that we actually reach people that are in the rural of areas and they cannot actually access some of the services that we offer, i.e., I remember the last time I think I had challenges during COVID, I actually had a doctor on call, right? I mean, it was via streaming, a video, and I could engage, right? But how do we empower everyone to actually, have similar access, yeah? But now I want to draw you closer to, how do we make sure that we create like an inclusive, so as to say, driven economy, right? For me, it starts with, the investment. We deliberate around where we make our investments, as an example, right? At what stage, and this is something that is really, closer to heart as well, at what stage do we start engaging and empowering, the young boys and girls around, some of the best, revolutionary technologies that are actually existing and taking place. But do they even have access to that, right? We are privy because we are the middle income, right? And we have access to all of these things. But how do we make sure that we actually, emancipate townships, rurals, empower them? There is so much work to be done in that space, and it's so data rich, but we have not even covered that space, right? But lastly, in the space as well, how do we ensure that, we focus on skills that are actually future fit, right? What are the key skills that we need to leave behind, like your generative AI, cognitive AI, and AI just in general, and other skills that are very, like programming. I mean, smartphones really requires a lot of developers, people that really are closer to the agenda, that can contribute. I think we need a level of biasness as well in the manner in which we actually develop and co-create these solutions. Because, I mean, if you think about most tech, and I'm looking around the room and it talks to the next pillar, I'm seeing almost 80% of the people that are in this room are male, right? From a diversity point of view, how do we actually create the inclusion? Yeah, open up the economy to actually bring about the females on board, but also making sure that we are diversely represented in terms of, cultural and religious overlay as well, right? The access to the internet has always been, one challenging aspect that really plugs in and connects people, right? Affordability has always been an issue, especially in our country, right? Compared to the other markets like East and West, where connectivity is really, cheap. But we've seen acceleration of that in terms of fiber. We've seen the cost going down. The competitiveness as well that is actually showing up in terms of startup is really helping us to accelerate this conversation, right? But we still have a lot to do. Wide coverage is not something that is prebby. If I go into East and West Africa and I'm trying to deploy IE, e-route to market, in order to really get closer to my consumers, I am not connected, right? I need to actually work offline and then later come back and therefore, get the data to be synced in order for me to drive decision making. At that point, it's a bit late for me to really, close on the opportunities that I'm seeing. So I think that is key for me. But lastly, I think it's about, ensuring that there is redundancy, right? Proper redundancy. How many times have you had issues around connectivity ourselves? And I mean, if then we are expecting, the people that we are servicing, which is our customers, consumers, how are we ensuring that, we are constantly thinking and putting them at the center of what we do? Whatever tech we think of, whatever opportunities we're thinking of, let's always address how we see them connecting and partnering within the right ecosystem as well to make sure that we continuously empower people. Mike? A reflection on my side, and I thought, I would like to just look at the overlay of broadband in its totality and how it's actually disrupting supply chains. So I think I want to talk more on an integrated supply chain, right? If you consider an integrated supply chain from factory all the way up to the product actually reaching the end consumer, right? There's a lot of interaction, and I think there's a lot of work that has been done to really, create richness of, connectivity and interaction throughout these points. The factories have empowered, they are empowered with IoT devices. Warehouses are empowered with moving vehicles, and to this date, I think we even have robotics that are actually controlling the picking of products. Some factories are actually running blind in some parts of the world, right? Where, they switch off the light and it just produces. But all of this cannot happen without connectivity, right? The factory of the future, I think I'm talking about, I think we're seeing some great examples coming in from Russia, from China, are really doing disruptive work in the space. If we think about, really utilizing, DCOM, ECOM to really reach the wider and broader, community as well, I think we really need to ask ourselves, have we done enough to actually interconnect everyone? But do they understand what we're trying to drive for as well? And I think I've talked about healthcare, and also I think getting the data back through interaction with people that are diverse, so that, we enrich the level of, I think we spoke about research in the morning that actually, is driving some of the key aspects that we see. Lastly, I think I just want to use maybe the last 2 minutes, and it's always tricky to see a clock counting down because you're asking yourself, will you actually cover all your slides, right? I would like to move more on this specific point because I think for me it's very important. And I think the point around speed, agility, is something that we always need to think about. And I think the speed for me really talks about how fast can we start, pulling, forces and masses and collaborating with purpose to really plug in and make sure that we address some of these core issues and opportunities or gaps that we're seeing. But how flexible can we be as well? Yeah. If we start seeing that, there are areas in which, we are not accelerating or actually doing well in. And the whole aspect and point of thinking global and acting local, and the other way around as well, is very important, right? Because there are certain areas in which, we are thought leaders in, and I think there are certain areas where we still require improvement, and I think it's always important we do that. Lastly, I think scalability is always something that we always talk about, but I think scalability also should come with, right solution for the right problem, right? Because we differ in terms of, maturity, in terms of readiness. And I think we constantly need to think about that in terms of, who is this person that is actually in the center of everything? But we cannot do this alone, right? Government, business and citizens have to really, work together to actually enrich and actually drive, the space within ICT, right? I mean, we've seen the riots that took place, I think, a few years back that really disrupted our infrastructure. So there has to be that level of ownership, I think, within the ecosystem as well, to really enrich the agenda around ICT. I thank you.